They say blood is thicker than water, but no one tells you what happens when your own blood decides you're not worth keeping. My father looked me in the eye and told me I was dead to him. All because I chose to marry a woman he deemed beneath us. I stood at that altar without a single member of my family present, and for 5 years, I convinced myself I didn't care. But when I got the call that he was dying, I realized something. You can't prepare yourself to forgive someone you never thought would ask. This is the story of how I lost my father twice, and how we both almost ran out of time to find each other again. Welcome to my Reddit diaries, where every story reveals the unseen battles within families. Don't forget to subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I'm standing outside the house I grew up in, and I haven't been here in 5 years. The gate is the same wrought iron with our family name embedded in the center. The hedges are still perfectly trimmed. The fountain in the circular driveway still runs. Everything looks exactly as it did the night I left. Except I'm different now. And the man inside who built all of this is dying. But let me take you back. Back to when I didn't know that loving someone could cost you everything. Her name was Maya. I met her at a community outreach event downtown. I was there because my father's company was sponsoring it, some PR move to make us look charitable. She was there because she actually cared. She wore a simple yellow sundress and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She was handing out food to homeless families, and when she smiled at this little kid who was too shy to ask for seconds, something in my chest shifted. I walked up to her table and she looked at me like I was just another volunteer. She didn't recognize my last name. She didn't know my family owned half the commercial real estate in this city. She just asked if I was there to help or to get in the way. I fell in love with her in that moment. We started dating quietly. Coffee shops across town. Walks in parks where no one from my world would see us. It wasn't that I was ashamed. It was that I knew. I knew what my father would say. What my family would think. Maya came from a working-class neighborhood. Her father was a mechanic. Her mother cleaned houses. She put herself through college working 2 jobs and graduated with a degree in social work. She spent her days helping people my family would cross the street to avoid. 6 months in, I couldn't hide her anymore. I didn't want to. So I brought her home for dinner. I told my mother beforehand. She went quiet on the phone and then said she'd make sure the table was set for 5. My father was late to dinner that night. He walked in still wearing his suit from the office, loosened his tie, and sat at the head of the table like a king surveying his court. My mother, my younger sister Vanessa, Maya, and me. We all sat there in silence until he picked up his fork. My father looked at Maya and said, "So, tell me about yourself." Maya smiled and it was genuine. She said, "Well, Mr. Morrison, I work as a social worker with at-risk youth in the East End. I grew up not far from there actually. My parents still live in the same house I was raised in." My father cut into his steak and didn't look up. He said, "Social work. That's admirable. Not particularly lucrative, but admirable." Maya didn't flinch. She said, "It's not about the money. It's about giving back." My sister Vanessa smirked into her wine glass. My mother stared at her plate. My father finally looked at her and said, "And your family? What does your father do?" Maya said, "He owns an auto shop. Been running it for 30 years. My father nodded slowly. He said, "I see. And you met my son at one of those charity events we sponsor." Maya said, "Yes, sir. He was actually really helpful that day." My father set down his fork and looked at me for the first time since he sat down. He said, "Was he?" The rest of the dinner was painful. Every question my father asked was a test. Every answer Maya gave was weighed and found wanting. When she left that night, she kissed me at the door and whispered, "I'm sorry if I made things difficult." I told her she was perfect. She wasn't the problem. My father called me into his study that night. He poured himself a scotch and didn't offer me one. He said, "She's not right for you." I said, "You don't even know her." He said, "I know enough. I know where she comes from. I know what people will think. I know what this family has built over 3 generations and I know what it takes to protect it." I said, "Dad, I love her." He looked at me like I just told him I was throwing my life away. He said, "You're 27 years old. You'll love a dozen women before you're done. This one will hold you back. She'll drag you down to her level. Is that what you want? To manage an auto shop? To live in some 2-bedroom rental?" I felt my hands shake. I said, "Maybe I want something real. Maybe I don't want to spend my life worrying about what the country club thinks." He downed his scotch and said, "Then you're not the man I raised." 3 months later, I proposed to Maya in the park where we'd had our first real conversation. I got down on one knee and she cried and said yes. And then she said, "Are you sure? I know what this might cost you." I told her she wasn't a cost. She was the only thing that made sense. I told my family the next day. I walked into the house and my father was in the living room reading the paper. My mother was arranging flowers. Vanessa was on her laptop working on some presentation for the company. I said, "I asked Maya to marry me." She said yes. My father folded the paper slowly. He said, no. I said, it's not a question. I'm telling you. We're getting married. He stood up and his voice went cold. He said, you will not do this. You will not embarrass this family. You will not throw away everything I've built. I said, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm building my own life. My mother said, sweetheart, maybe you should think about this. Vanessa said, he's being selfish. As usual. My father stepped closer to me and said, call it off. End it now. Or you walk out that door and you don't come back. I looked at him and I realized he meant it. I said, then I guess I'm leaving. He said, you use the family name, you use the family money, you use everything I've given you, and this is how you repay me? By choosing some girl over your own blood. I said, she's not some girl. She's going to be my wife. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you were never the father I thought you were. The room went silent. My mother covered her mouth. Vanessa stared at me like I'd committed murder. My father's face went stone cold. He said, get out. You're no longer my son. You're dead to me. Don't call. Don't write. Don't use the Morrison name. You're nothing. I walked upstairs and packed a bag. My mother followed me and stood in the hallway crying, but she didn't say a word. She didn't stop me. She didn't choose me. I walked past her and down the stairs, and my father was standing at the window in his study, staring out at the garden. He didn't turn around. I left that night and I never looked back. Maya and I got married 3 months later in a small community center. Her family was there. Her father walked her down the aisle and cried. Her mother hugged me and said, welcome to the family. I had a few friends there, but no one from my side. My phone buzzed twice during the ceremony. Text messages from my mother's number. They were deleted before I could read them. I knew my father had taken her phone. We danced our first dance in that small room with folding chairs and paper decorations, and I held Maya close and thought, this is it. This is what choosing love looks like. It's not glamorous. It's not easy. But it's mine. That night, lying in our tiny apartment, Maya asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if my father was awake too. If he was thinking about me. If he regretted it. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was free. But the truth is, you're never really free from the people who raised you. Even when they disown you. Even when they tell you you're dead to them. You carry them with you. In every decision. In every doubt. I married the love of my life that day. And I buried my father in the same breath. At least I thought I did. Before we continue, if you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories take time to craft, and your support means everything. Drop a comment and let me know, have you ever had to choose between family and love? Let's get into it. 5 years. That's how long I went without speaking to my father. Without seeing my mother except for those brief, painful moments when I'd catch a glimpse of her at the grocery store across town and we'd both pretend we didn't see each other. 5 years of building a life from nothing, of learning what it meant to truly stand on your own. Maya and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood my father would have called dangerous. The paint was peeling. The radiator clanked at night. Our neighbors fought loud enough that we learned their names through the walls. But it was ours. Every piece of furniture we bought secondhand. Every meal we cooked together. Every bill we struggled to pay on time. It was ours. I took a job teaching at a community college. English literature. It paid barely enough to cover rent, but I loved it. These kids reminded me of Maya. Hungry for something better. Working 2 jobs while taking classes. Falling asleep over their textbooks. I saw myself in them too, but a different version. The version I could have been if I'd been born somewhere else. Maya kept working as a social worker. She'd come home exhausted, sometimes crying over a case she couldn't fix, a kid she couldn't save. I'd hold her and she'd say, I can't give up on them. And I'd say, I know. We learned to budget in ways I never had to before. Grocery shopping with coupons. Fixing our car with YouTube tutorials. Celebrating our anniversary at a diner instead of the restaurants I grew up taking for granted. And somehow, it felt more real than anything I'd known. When Maya laughed at something stupid I said while we were doing dishes, when we stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, when we made love in our cramped bedroom, I knew I'd made the right choice. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Sometimes I'd drive past my old neighborhood. I'd take the long way home from work and find myself on that tree-lined street with the huge houses set back from the road. I'd slow down as I passed the gate with my family name on it. I never stopped. I never pulled in. But I looked. And every time I did, a part of me wondered what they were doing. If they ever thought about me. If my father regretted it. I started seeing things. Evidence that they were doing fine without me. Better than fine. The company expanded. New office buildings went up with Morrison Development Corporation emblazoned on the side. My sister Vanessa got promoted to VP. I saw her face in the business section of the paper. I saw social media posts of her at charity galas with my parents, all of them smiling like I'd never existed. My mother sent me a birthday card once. It came with no return address, just a local postmark. Inside it said, "I think of you. I pray for you. I'm sorry." No signature. I held that card for an hour before Maya found me sitting on the couch staring at it. She sat next to me and said, "You could call her." I said, "She made her choice." Maya said, "Maybe she didn't feel like she had one." I put the card in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. Late at night I'd think about my mother. About how she used to kiss me goodnight when I was a kid. About how she'd stood in that hallway crying while I packed my bags and said nothing. About how she'd chosen her marriage over her son. 3 years into our marriage, I ran into one of my father's old business associates at a coffee shop. He recognized me immediately. He hesitated, then walked over. His name was David Chin. He'd been coming to our house since I was a teenager. He said, "I wasn't sure if I should say hello." I said, "It's fine." He ordered his coffee and stood there awkwardly. Then he said, "Your father asks about you." I looked at him. I said, "What?" He said, "Not in front of anyone. But I've heard him. Late at night, at the office when he thinks no one's around. He asks your mother if you're okay. If you're eating. If you're safe." I felt something twist in my chest. I said, "He has a funny way of showing it." David said, "I'm not defending him. I just thought you should know. He's too proud to reach out. But he hasn't forgotten you." He left after that and I sat there with my coffee going cold. Part of me wanted to run back to that house and tell my father I forgave him. Part of me wanted to let him suffer in his pride for the rest of his life. I did neither. I went home and I held Maya and I tried to forget the conversation ever happened. Then everything changed. Maya got pregnant. We found out on a random Tuesday morning. She took the test while I was making breakfast and she walked out of the bathroom holding the stick with tears streaming down her face. She said, "We're having a baby." I dropped the spatula. I picked her up and spun her around in our tiny kitchen and we both laughed and cried and I thought, this is it. This is what it's all about. We were terrified. Our apartment was barely big enough for 2 people. We were living paycheck to paycheck. We had no idea how we were going to afford diapers and formula and everything else. But we were also more excited than I'd ever been about anything in my life. I started thinking about my father. About the lessons he'd taught me, both good and bad. About the kind of father I wanted to be. About the kind of father I wouldn't be. When our daughter was born, they placed her in my arms and I looked at her tiny face and I thought, my father is missing this. He's missing his granddaughter. By choice. We named her Emma. She had Maya's eyes and my nose and when she wrapped her tiny hand around my finger I felt something break open inside me. I almost called my parents that night. I had my phone in my hand. I had the number dialed. But I stopped. If he wanted to be here, he knew where I was. 2 more years passed. Emma grew. She started walking. Started talking. Started filling our apartment with toys and laughter and chaos. Maya and I were exhausted and broke and happier than we'd ever been. Then my phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was grading papers while Emma napped. The number was one I deleted from my phone years ago but I still recognized it. My sister. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Vanessa's voice sounded different. Softer. Uncertain. She said, "It's me." I said, "I know." She said, "Dad's sick." I didn't say anything. She said, "It's cancer. Stage 4. They're saying 6 months. Maybe less." I sat there listening to my daughter breathe in the next room. I said, "Why are you calling me?" She said, "Because he's dying. And he won't ask for you. But I think you should know." I said, "He disowned me." She said, "I know. I was there." I said, "Then you know why I can't come." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I do. But I also know that if you don't come, you'll regret it. We both know how stubborn he is. He's not going to apologize. He's not going to beg. But he's dying. And he's our father." I hung up without saying goodbye. Maya found me sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. She said, "What happened?" I told her. She pulled up a chair and held my hand and said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I don't know." For 3 days I couldn't think about anything else. I'd be teaching and lose my train of thought. I'd be playing with Emma and find myself somewhere else. Maya didn't push. She just waited. Finally, on the 4th day, she said, "If you don't go, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. I don't want you carrying that. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But I think you need to see him." I looked at her and said, "What if it doesn't change anything?" She said, "Then at least you'll know." I made the decision that night. I wasn't going to save him. I wasn't going to reconcile. I was going to look him in the eye one more time and prove to myself that I didn't need his approval. That I'd built something better without him. I was going for me. Not for him. The drive to my childhood home felt like traveling through time. Every turn was familiar. Every street held a memory. When I pulled up to the gate, my hands were shaking. The gate opened automatically. Someone had been watching. I parked in the circular driveway and sat there for 5 minutes before I could make myself get out of the car. The front door opened before I reached it. My mother stood there. She'd aged. Her hair was completely gray now. She'd lost weight. But her eyes were the same. And when she saw me, they filled with tears. She didn't say anything. She just stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. She held on tight and I felt her shaking. I hugged her back and felt 5 years of anger and hurt and longing crash over me like a wave. When she finally let go, she said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "Where is he?" She said, "Upstairs. He doesn't know you're here." I walked into the house and it smelled the same. Looked the same. Vanessa was standing in the hallway. She nodded at me and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Regret. I climbed the stairs to my father's bedroom. The door was partially open. I could hear the sound of machines beeping. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My father was lying in a hospital bed that had been set up in his room. He'd lost so much weight. His skin was gray. His eyes were closed. For a moment I thought he was already gone. Then his eyes opened. He looked at me. And for the first time in 5 years, we were in the same room. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "You came." I said, "I did." And I stood there, my hand on the doorframe, looking at the man who'd given me everything and then taken it all away, and I had no idea what to say next. If you're still with me, thank you. This story matters because it's real. It's about the walls we build and the bridges we burn. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Comment below and tell me, would you have gone back? Would you have forgiven him? Let's find out what happens next. I pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen flowing through the tube in his nose. My father looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. Maybe to him I was. He tried to sit up but couldn't. He said, "You didn't have to come." I said, "I know." He looked away, out the window at the garden he used to walk through every morning. He said, "How long has it been?" I said, 5 years. 3 months. 17 days. He closed his eyes. He said, "You counted." I said, "Every single one." We sat in silence for a while. I watched his chest rise and fall, labored and slow. This man who'd seemed invincible my entire childhood, who'd commanded boardrooms and built an empire, was dying in a bed that looked too big for him now. Finally he spoke. His voice was weak but clear. He said, "I thought I was protecting you. The family. Everything we'd built over generations. I thought if I let you make that choice, you'd regret it. That you'd resent me for not stopping you." I said, "So instead you disowned me." He said, "Yes." I waited for more but he went quiet again. I said, "That's it? That's your explanation?" He turned his head to look at me and I saw tears in his eyes. I'd never seen my father cry. Not once in my entire life. He said, "I was wrong. God, I was so wrong about everything." I felt my throat tighten. I said, "Do you have any idea what you did to me? What it felt like to walk out of this house knowing my own father thought I was worthless?" He said, "I never thought you were worthless." I said, "You told me I was dead to you." He said, "I was angry. I was scared. I thought you were throwing your life away." I stood up. I said, "I built a life. A real one. I have a wife who loves me. I have a daughter. I have a job that matters. I did all of that without you. Without your money. Without your name. And you know what? I'm happier than I ever was living under your roof." He was crying now, tears running down his hollow cheeks. He said, "I know. Your mother told me. She kept track even when I told her not to. She showed me pictures she found online. Your wedding. Your daughter. She's beautiful." I sat back down. I said, "Her name is Emma." He smiled and it was sad. He said, "That was my mother's name." I said, "I know." He reached for my hand and I let him take it. His grip was weak. He said, "I kept telling myself you'd fail. That you'd come crawling back and I'd be there to say I told you so. But you didn't. You built something I could never build. A life based on love instead of legacy. And I missed it. I missed all of it because I was too proud to admit I was wrong." I said, "Why didn't you call? Why didn't you reach out?" He said, "Because I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say. And the longer it went on, the harder it became. Every day I'd think about picking up the phone. Every birthday. Every Christmas. And I'd stop myself because I thought you hated me. That you'd moved on. That you were better off without me." I said, "I did hate you. For a long time. But I also missed you." He squeezed my hand. He said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For the things I said. For the years I stole from both of us. For being too stubborn to see what really mattered." I sat there holding my father's hand and feeling 5 years of anger and pain and longing pour out of me. I said, "I came here to prove I didn't need your forgiveness. That I'd moved on without you." He said, "Did it work?" I said, "Ugh." Because I realized I can't move on while carrying all of this. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of hurting. He said, then let it go. Please. I don't have much time left and I don't want to spend it knowing you're still carrying my mistakes. I wiped my eyes. I said, I want you to meet them, Maya and Emma. If you're willing. He said, I'd like that more than anything. I called Maya. I told her to come. I told her to bring Emma. She said, are you sure? And I said, yes. An hour later, I heard the front door open downstairs. I heard my mother's voice, soft and welcoming. I heard Emma's laugh echoing through the house. My father heard it too. He turned his head toward the door. I went to the top of the stairs and saw Maya holding Emma's hand. Emma was wearing her favorite blue dress with flowers on it. She looked up at me and said, Daddy, this house is huge. I said, I know, baby. Come upstairs. Maya carried Emma up and we walked into the bedroom together. My father was watching the door. When he saw Maya, he started crying again. When he saw Emma, he couldn't speak. Emma looked at him curiously. She said, are you sick? I said, yes, sweetheart. This is your grandfather. Emma walked right up to the bed without any fear. She said, hi, Grandpa. I'm Emma. I'm 4. My father said, hi, Emma. I'm very happy to meet you. Emma said, why are you crying? He said, because I'm happy. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy. Maya sat down in the chair next to the bed. She took my father's other hand and said, Mr. Morrison, I never wanted to take your son from you. I only wanted to love him. My father looked at her and said, I know that now. I see that. And I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. You made him better than I ever could. Maya said, he made himself better. We just did it together. Emma climbed up on the bed, carefully avoiding the tubes and wires. She said, Grandpa, do you want to see my drawing? I made it in school. My father said, I'd love to see it. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It was a drawing of our family. Stick figures with big smiles. Me, Maya, and Emma holding hands. My father looked at it for a long time. He said, it's beautiful. Can I keep it? Emma said, yeah, but you have to put it somewhere you can see it. He said, I will. I promise. We stayed for hours. Emma told him about preschool, about her favorite color, about the cat she wanted us to get. My father listened to every word like it was the most important thing he'd ever heard. Maya talked about her work, and my father asked her questions about the kids she helped. Real questions. Interested questions. My mother came in and out, bringing tea and cookies for Emma. Vanessa stood in the doorway at one point, watching. She caught my eye and mouthed, thank you. I nodded. Over the next few weeks, I visited every day. Sometimes with Maya and Emma, sometimes alone. My father and I talked about everything. About his childhood, about his own father who'd been even harder on him than he'd been on me. About the pressure he'd felt to maintain the family legacy. About his regrets. He told me, I built all of this thinking it would matter. The buildings. The money. The name. But none of it matters now. What matters is sitting in this room. Your family. That's the only legacy worth having. One afternoon, Emma brought him a book. She said, Grandpa, will you read to me? He was getting weaker by then. His voice was barely a whisper. But he opened the book and he read to her. She curled up next to him in the bed, careful with his tubes, and listened. I watched from the doorway and my mother stood next to me. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, thank you for giving him this. I said, I should have come sooner. She said, you came when you were ready. That's all that matters. My father died 3 weeks after I first came back. It was early on a Sunday morning. We were all there. My mother holding his hand. Vanessa on the other side of the bed. Maya and I standing close. Emma was with Maya's parents. His final words were to me. He squeezed my hand and said, I'm proud of you. I should have told you that years ago. You were right about everything. I said, I love you, Dad. He said, I love you too, son. And then he closed his eyes and he was gone. At the funeral, I gave the eulogy. I stood at that podium and looked at the crowd of business associates and society friends and I told them the truth. I said, my father was brilliant and stubborn and for 5 years, we didn't speak. He disowned me for marrying the woman I loved. But in his final weeks, he taught me something more important than he'd taught me in my entire life. He taught me that it's never too late to say you're sorry. That pride is a prison we build for ourselves. That love is the only thing that survives us. I looked at Maya sitting in the front row holding Emma. I said, he died with his family around him. And I'm grateful I was there. Because I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to carry the weight anymore. After the service, Vanessa pulled me aside. She said, I'm sorry too. For not standing up for you. For going along with him. I said, we all made mistakes. She said, I was jealous. You had the courage to walk away. I never did. I said, "It's not too late." She smiled and hugged me. Now, a year later, I visit his grave with Emma. She brings him flowers and tells him about kindergarten. Maya and I are closer than ever. My mother has dinner with us every Sunday. Vanessa quit the company and went back to school to become a teacher. Standing at that grave, holding my daughter's hand, I think about everything we lost and everything we found. My father disowned me for choosing love. And for 5 years, we both lived in the prison of pride. But when time ran out, we found what we should have had all along. The courage to say sorry. The strength to forgive. If there's someone you've cut off, someone you're waiting to apologize, don't wait as long as we did. Because pride is a heavy thing to carry. And life is too short to die holding it. I look at Emma and she says, "Daddy, why are you crying?" I say, "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy." She says, "Like Grandpa did." I say, "Is like Grandpa did." We walk back to the car where Maya is waiting. Emma runs ahead. Maya takes my hand and says, "You okay?" I say, "Yeah, I really am." Thank you for staying with the story until the end. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own family, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And please, drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose between pride and love? How did it turn out? I read every single comment. This is my Reddit diaries, and I'll see you in the next story.